Hello wonderful people, it's Genevieve and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. So if you're new, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekly videos and so that you can join our wonderful creative community. Now today we're going to be drawing and if you want animating a really nice groovy lava lamp using Procreate. And this tutorial might be a little bit on the longer side, but it is really quite simple. It's just that the animation itself, planning the movement is going to take a little bit more time, but it's really quite simple. So grab your drawing tools and let's get started. Now, a fun thing about this tutorial is that it is entirely customizable. You could have any shape, any color you want for your lava lamp. I'm going to give you tips on picking that as we go. But one thing that is really important to consider before starting, if you plan on animating, is the size of your canvas. Because you may or may not know, Procreate does limit how many layers you can have in one canvas. And that depends on a lot of factors like which iPad you're using, as well as the canvas size. And to animate in Procreate, we're going to need to create a bunch of layers because those are going to be essentially the movement in our piece. So when you create your canvas, make sure you have at least 60 layers available. So in my case, for example, here, if I go and look at this canvas information, what I'm using here is a square canvas that is 2400 pixel by 2400 pixel. And based on this iPad spec, I think it is the 2020 iPad, if I remember correctly, it means I have 178 layers, which is above 60, so we're all good. So here we're going to start by just mapping out the shape of the lamp itself. Then if you want to animate it, I'm going to show how to plan your animation. And at the end, we're going to all come back together, whether you're animating or not, and we're going to color the lava, I guess. Now we're going to start by setting our background to a really nice dark color. Here, again, you can pick whatever color you want. I'm going with a very dark purpley blue. Now throughout this entire video, I'm going to add the hex codes of the colors I'm using right here on the top right if you want to follow along and use the exact same colors as I am using. And that hex code, you can simply take it and put it in the value section here of your color panel and the hexadecimal little area right there. So that is definitely an option that you have. Otherwise, again, you can just pick your own colors or you can practice trying to recreate my colors by following the prompts and the tips I'm going to give you. So I'm always going to give you tips on the hue, saturation, and the brightness of the color. So in this case, again, it is a purpley blue that is, I would say, 3/4 of the way in terms of the saturation, and it is so dark that we can barely see it. So it's not fully dark, but almost quite there. I'm not gonna lie, I'm really not feeling the best today, so I'm really sorry if you see my hand shake. It's just that I'm trying to push through. But it's all good, we're gonna do this. And then once we have the background, we're actually going to draw the basic shape that we want the lamp to be. So just a flat silhouette. So go ahead and create a new layer and rename that new layer to base shape. And we're going to reuse this base shape a lot, creating masks with it as well as other shapes and transparency and cool things like that. But for now, we're just going to start by drawing it with a neutral gray that is quite light. So neutral gray, no saturation, and I would say this time 1/4 of the way to fully bright. Now in this video, we're going to be only using two brushes, a hard brush and a soft brush. So really nothing fancy here, but I think it is important to find brushes that you like. So you can obviously use from the airbrushing pack that comes with Procreate the hard brush and the soft brush. These are free and those would work perfectly fine. But if you have a hard brush and a soft brush that is made by either me or another creator that you know you like and you're comfortable with, feel free to go ahead and pick those. I'm personally going to be using the brushes from my inking, stippling, and texture bundle because I built those to be brushes that I really like in terms of, I feel I have more control over them than just the free Procreate brushes. But these brushes are not essential at all. You can definitely follow along with just the free Procreate brushes. That being said, if you do want to check it out, it will be linked in the description below and there's always a special promo code for the YouTube people. So to draw the silhouette, we're just going to go with a hard brush that doesn't have any feathering, any transparency, or any texture to it. So again, free brush option that you have within Procreate would be going in the airbrushing pack that comes with the app and picking the hard brush. You could also experiment with something from the inking pack that comes with the app. Something like the technical pen or the studio pen. Those could be fun options to experiment with as well. If you do have my inking, stippling, and texture bundle though, we're going to go in the inking pack. And here we're going to pick either the base round brush or the ultra smooth tracing. I'm going to go with the ultra smooth tracing, but both of those would work really well. And to make our job easy, because the lamp is symmetrical, we're going to activate Drawing Assist within Procreate. So go ahead and open the wrench icon menu here at the top. In the Canvas submenu, go ahead and activate Drawing Guide right here. Now in my case, it's already showing up as a vertical line in the middle. If it is not for you, just go ahead and open Edit Drawing Guide right here. Select the Symmetry option on the far right. And if it is still not giving you a vertical line in the middle, just tap on Option and pick Vertical. Make sure Rotational Symmetry is deactivated as well. And then if you want, you can play with these settings here. They're not going to affect the final result. It is just for the display of this line right here, so the guide. I'm going to try and make mine as visible as I can. I always struggle with that. I feel like when I record from the preview on the camera, it looks fine, and then I come to edit and you cannot see the guides at all. So hopefully you can see it well here, but essentially it's just a vertical line in the middle, nothing fancy. And once we do have the guide, we're going to make sure that the symmetry is activated onto the layer we're drawing. So just tap on the layer menu and make sure you see the assisted label right under your layer name. If you do not see it, not a problem, just tap on the layer and select Drawing Assist from the menu right here. And now that we have those settings, whatever we draw on one side of the canvas is going to be automatically mirrored on the other side, which means we can just come in and start mapping out the shape of our lamp. So this is something, again, you can completely customize. I'm going to go with just the most traditional, I would say, lamp shape. So that means I'm going to start with a fairly narrow top. And then I'm going to bring it down at a slight angle. And then we're going to bring it down and inwards, and we want that little pinch or cinch, I guess, in the base to be the same width as the top. So to make it easier, what you can do is just come at the top here and just draw yourself a little bit of a guide, which should make this next step very easy. And then we're going to draw the base. And the base should align roughly with the widest point of this section right here in the lamp. So once more, you can draw yourself a guide. We're going to have to erase this one, but it's not a big deal. And then we're just going to close the bottom section with a slight curve. So once you have your base shape, go ahead and fill it in. And I'm not sure if you can see it, if my camera is picking it up, but depending on the brush you use and depending on the angles of your lines, you might see a little bit of, I guess, weird little pixelated lines on the edges when you're filling your shape. To get rid of those lines, all you have to do is increase the threshold of your color fill. So just hold the pencil on the screen when you're dropping your color, and then move it towards the right to increase the threshold, or towards the left to decrease the threshold. So the goal here is going to be moving it towards the right until you lose those little lines, which shouldn't be too much. And then just repeating until you have your entire silhouette filled. And if, like me, you added any guides on the outside, just go ahead and use your eraser to get rid of those. Now, to get a really cool, groovy, dark effect, we're going to have the base of the lamp be the exact same color as the background. That way, we're going to be able to really focus on the lava itself and use a glow effect to make the whole piece pop. So in order for us to draw the base, we're going to take a little bit of a break from it and move on to the background glow effects, just so that we can then come back, change the color of the base itself to the original color of the background and still see what we're doing. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're just going to create two very simple gradients, one for, I guess, the back wall, and then one for the table or whatever surface the lamp would be resting on. So go ahead and create a new layer, put it below the base shape, and rename it to Wall Glow. Now this glow is going to be the same color as your lava. So I'm going to go with a very bright pink, but again, you can go with something completely different. In my case, I'm going to go with this right here, which, as you can see, is pretty much a magenta kind of color. It is almost fully bright and quite saturated. Now here, if you want to go with a different hue, so maybe like a blue or a green, make sure you still use similar kind of brightness and saturation. So very saturated and very, very bright, but you can go with any hue of your choice. And here you can just use the same brush to draw a very loose circle behind your lamp shape. Then just go ahead and fill it in. And then go ahead and move it to make sure it is in the section of the lamp or behind the section of the lamp, which would be glass. So this area right here. And then we're going to create the glow effect by adding a blur. So just go in the adjustment panel here at the top, select Gaussian blur in this section of the menu here. And then you can swipe your finger towards the right to add blur and towards the left to reduce the blur. Now you don't want too much blur that everything disappears, but not so little blur that it doesn't look like a glow. I think a good rule of thumb would be adding your blur until your glow extends towards the top and the bottom section of the lamp right here. So in my case, seems like it's going to be 63%. Now you could totally keep it like that, but if you want a richer glow, we're going to add a second colored glow. So go ahead and duplicate that wall glow. So just swipe it towards the left with one finger and then tap on duplicate. And if you already have another color in mind, just go ahead and pick it, that's totally okay. But in Procreate, there's a really cool tool to help us find colors that work really well together. It is in the color menu here. In the bottom, it is called Harmony. And essentially what it does is it takes the color that you have selected, and then it shows you colors that would work well with it on the color wheel. And now right now I have the tetradic options activated, but if you tap on the word under color, it might be different than tetradic for you. You're going to see a few different options, and all of those options would work well. Now I saw something that I like in the tetradic options, so I'm going to go back to it. It was this kind of orange right here. I think that would look really, really good. So I'm just going to go ahead and select that. But because this color is going to be always only used for light, I'm going to make it fully bright. So just going back to the classic view of the color menu and just bringing the brightness up to 100%. Then from there, what you can do is just drop your color onto your duplicated glow. And you're probably going to need to adjust the threshold here so it's really, really high and fills up the entire gradient. And to make it look even more like light, we are going to apply a blending mode to this layer. So just go back in your layer panel and then tap on the little N next to the check mark on this new glow layer that we have with your secondary color. That's going to open up your opacity slider as well as the blending modes right here. Now you can scroll through the list until you find a blending mode that you like. I would recommend scrolling to the bottom because the top is usually used for creating shadows, although that looks pretty cool. And yeah, just pick whatever looks good to you. I'm just going to go with overlay right here. And to have a little bit of a better effect or a better contrast between our two different colors, we're going to shrink this second color. So go ahead and use your arrow tool, making sure it is set to uniform. And just shrink that color. And then you can just place it back in the middle. So you can see it's very simple, but it does make the glow color feel a little bit more interesting, a little bit more rich and vibrant. And at this stage, we can actually maybe go back to the original glow we had and add even more blur. So just select the layer, going back in the adjustment panel, picking Gaussian blur, and just adding a little bit of blur. Great. So now we're going to create the glow under the lamp on the table. And so for that, you can just duplicate the two wall glow layers you have. Then move them around so that they're properly stacked. And rename two of the copies to table glow instead of wall glow. And these can be above or under the wall glow, it doesn't matter, just make sure they're together. Then go ahead and select both of your table glow layer by swiping them towards the right with one finger, so you should see both being blue now. And we're going to use the arrow tool to squish them and then reposition them so that they are under the lamp as opposed to behind the lamp. So to squish them, we're going to set our arrow tool here to freeform instead of uniform. And we're just going to take this top blue angel right here and bring it down to squish our glow. And then you're just going to reposition it so that it is right under the base of the lamp. And one really cool effect that we're getting here is because we added such a big blur on the wall glow, it was going outside of the frame, and so when we squish it, it actually creates a line here which looks like a bit of a table. But we're going to reinforce that line with even more light. And so for that, just go on your secondary color table glow. So in my case, it was this yellow table glow right here, the one that has the blending mode. And we're going to use a soft brush for that. So if you're working with free Procreate brushes, you can just pick in the airbrushing pack the soft brush, nothing super fancy here. But if you do have my inking, stippling, and texture bundle, we're going to go in the texture pack this time. Whoops. There we go, texture and grid pack. And we're going to pick the big soft layer builder. Making sure that whichever brush you're using is fairly small. You're going to zoom onto your piece, and you're just going to emphasize that line that we have here for the end of the table, mostly focusing on the middle of the piece. So this should be very, very subtle. And you want to make sure that you add the light, obviously, on the bottom section so that the darkish section at the top remains dark. Just like that. So take all the time you need if you want to add more elements to your background. That would be a good time to do it. Otherwise, we're going to go back to drawing the lamp itself. Great, so now that we have the background, we can actually go back to drawing the metal part of the lamp, or plastic. Honestly, I do not know what it is, but in my mind it's metal. So go ahead and open your layer menu. And actually here, we're just going to create a group with all of these glow layers just to keep our file organized, because when we do the animation, we're going to end up with so many layers. It's a good idea to make sure we take the time to organize everything as we go. So to group layers in Procreate, very easy. You just select them by, again, swiping them towards the right with one finger. So all of those glow layers we're going to select, not the base shape. And then you just tap group right here. And from there, you can collapse the group by tapping on the little triangle icon right there. And you can also rename the group by tapping on it, selecting rename from the menu, and then renaming it to whatever. Here, I'm going to go and rename it to background. There you go. Now again, because I want something really groovy, dark, and moody, I'm going to have my base lamp, or the base of the lamp, be the same color as the background. Obviously, if you want to have something different, just go ahead with something different. Otherwise, we're going to either go back in the history to pick our background color, or you can just go on the very edges of your piece and color pick like that. And we're going to create a new layer above the base shape, and we're going to rename that new layer to lamp. And to make it extra easy on ourselves, to make sure we have symmetry once more, we're going to activate assisted drawing on this layer as well. So just tap on the layer and select drawing assist from the menu. And if you want it here, you could just go ahead and trace over your base shape, making sure you're staying within that shape. But to make it a little bit easier on ourselves, we're going to create a mask from that base shape. So if you're not familiar with masks, look very closely here at what I'm doing first, and then I'm going to explain essentially why we're doing what we're doing. So go ahead and open your layer panel, and with 2 fingers, press and hold on the base shape layer, which is going to select the pixels, so the lamp shape, on that layer. Then go back in your layer panel, and this time tap on the lamp layer, and from the menu here, select mask. And once you see that mask created right above your lamp layer with this black outline of the lamp and the white silhouette of the lamp, you can just go ahead and quit the selection by tapping on the selection tool at the top. And what masks do is they allow you to draw on only a specific part of a layer. So in our case, because we selected the base shape, is going to be the shape of the lamp. So if we go back on the lamp layer, not the layer mask of it, with our background color and whichever tool we were using to draw the base shape of the lamp, so any kind of hard round brush or an inking brush like my ultra smooth tracing brush, we can go back in and whatever we draw is going to stay within the base shape of the lamp. So that means we can go ahead and draw the shape we want for the top and the shape we want for the bottom. Now, if we were to go ahead and try to fill in the bottom and the top right now, it would fill in the entire canvas because these shapes are still open. We cannot really see it, but we need to go on the edges and then essentially close the shapes. And then we're going to be able to fill them in. Great. So now that we have that, we can actually go back on the base shape that we have and lower the opacity of it to make it look a little bit more like glass as opposed to something very opaque. So just tap on the end next to the check mark and then lower the opacity of your layer really a whole lot, probably between 10 and 15%. Now the lamp is starting to take shape, but it is really flat and that's not a good look. So we're going to add a few layers of light onto the glass and then onto the top and the base. So create a new layer above the base shape but under the lamp and rename that to glass lights. And just like we did for the glow in the background, we're going to use a blending mode onto that glass light layer just so it pops a little bit more and interacts well with the lava underneath. So just tap on the little end next to the check mark once more and we're going to go back to the blending mode overlay. Now, in terms of color here, you're going to pick a really bright version of your secondary color. So in my case, it was this nice yellow here. And we're just going to move it towards the top left of our color selector. And we're just going to go back to whatever soft brush you were using. So again, either in the airbrushing panel, the soft brush, or if you have my inking, stippling, and texture bundle, the big soft layer builder. And we're just going to draw highlights on both sides of the glass. And here, the size of the brush is going to depend on a few factors like the size of the canvas you're using, as well as which brush you're using, but there's no right or wrong brush size here. As long as you have something big enough to be able to draw this kind of highlight in one stroke, you're golden. So very simple here, we're just drawing these two lines to start our highlights. And then if you want, you can gently bring them in to create a bit of a softer edge towards the inside. Great. Now we're going to move on to adding extra bright highlights onto the glass. So just create a new layer above the glass lights, but still below the lamp. And rename that new layer to glass highlights. And we're going to stick with the same color and the same brush, and for now we're going to keep our layer as normal, but once we have the highlights, we're going to come back in and experiment with different blending modes. But here we're going to make the brush a little bit smaller. Again, no right or wrong answer, you can definitely experiment. You just want something that is going to allow you to come in on the edges and draw these very bright, precise highlights. If you are enjoying the tutorial so far, please consider helping me by giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Now, I know everyone on YouTube is asking you to do that, but believe it or not, it does make a big difference for us and it really does help the channel because it tells YouTube to take the video and show it to more people. So thank you for helping. And once you have your first highlight line, what you can do is just come back in and reinforce the middle. So just thicken in the middle of the line towards the inside a tiny little bit. Doing that on both sides. And then we're going to go back to a slightly bigger brush. Again, just experiment. You want something in between the lights and the highlight. Kind of like this. Again, it doesn't need to be precise in any way. And we're just going to lower the opacity of that brush a tiny little bit. So the opacity of a brush is this slider right here on the side. And you're going to drop that probably around 80%. And then we're going to add extra highlights this time onto the glass itself, so not the very edges. So starting on the right side, at the top, we're just going to draw another highlight like this. And then a smaller one that is going to start a little bit lower than the top and end a little bit higher than the bottom. Like this. Now once more, we can go back in and reinforce the middle section of these highlights. So just drawing on top of them again. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side, although a little bit less intensely. and probably focusing on the bottom here just to make it look a little bit less perfectly symmetrical. So onto the bottom up to, I don't know, 3/4 of the way, and then a little bit higher than the bottom, and a little bit lower than 3/4 of the way. And if you want, you could experiment with reinforcing the middle of these, but I think I'm just going to leave mine a little bit softer like this. I'm really starting to like the look of it, so I'm not going to mess with it anymore. And if you feel like some of your edges or ends of the lines might be a little bit too harsh, at least I feel like mine might be a little too harsh, it's not a problem at all. You can just go ahead, select your eraser, and set your eraser to the soft brush you're using. So either, again, in the airbrushing pack, the soft brush, free brushes that come with Procreate. I'm going to stop saying it, I promise. I feel like I'm just repeating myself, but yeah, soft brush. Or if you have my inking, stippling, and texture bundle from the texture and grid pack, the big soft layer builder. And you can just use that eraser to gently blend in the edges of your strokes. Awesome! Now, as I mentioned, once we have these highlights mapped out, we're going to go back and play with the blending modes. So once more, feel free to just scroll through the list until you find something you like. I think I'm going to go with, I don't know actually. I think I'm going to go with screen. Great, so from there we're going to do something very similar onto the base and top of the lamp so that they're a little bit less flat as well. So go ahead and create a new layer, put it above the lamp layer. And to make sure that it stays within this lamp shape that we have, we're going to apply it as what is called a clipping mask, which is essentially just like the layer mask that we created here, but on a separate layer. So just go ahead and tap onto your new layer and select clipping mask from the list right here. And we're going to rename this new layer to Lamp Light. And to draw these lights, we're actually going to select the main lava color we have. So in my case, this bright pink right here. And we're just going to keep it as is. And here, still with a soft brush in the same size we just used, but with a lowered opacity, this time probably around, I don't know, 30–40%, something like that. We're going to go back in and we're going to draw some highlights on the top and the bottom. So the first light is just going to be following all the highlights we have onto the glass. So you can literally just start on the glass and then bring that up. Don't forget the very edge. Same thing on the other side. And maybe a little bit on the very top as well. Now we're going to do the same thing onto the bottom. Now the bottom we're going to keep a little bit more subdued for this section, and then we're going to bring the highlights back up on this section, because if you think about it, this section is actually going away from the light, so it's not going to have a whole lot of highlights, but then this section is going back towards the light, so this one is going to have highlights again. And if I just confuse you by saying that, just forget about it. Don't worry, I'm going to show you exactly what to do anyway. So for this section here, we're just going to follow this main highlight we have on the glass and draw the tiniest little highlight like this. But then on the very base, we're just going to let loose and essentially just draw a bunch of highlights. It really doesn't matter much where they are. I would recommend having one on the very edge on both sides. But then you can just really draw whatever you want. Some more intense than others, some more subdued. And making sure you have a few different width. So thicker lights, thinner lights, really making sure you have a good mix. And make sure you bring those a little bit higher than the top. Once we're done, we're just going to come back in and erase to really make sure that edge here, that little cinch moment, is super crisp. So I think something super simple like this. And I'm actually going to come in and add a bit of a thickness onto that ledge. So I'm just going to rotate it. It's going to be easier. Probably a smaller version of the brush, although it doesn't matter much. And just following this edge right here. There you go. And at this stage, honestly, this middle symmetry line that we have is getting really confusing. So what we can do is just go back in the wrench icon menu and deactivate the drawing guide toggle. Our symmetry guide is still going to be saved, so if we want to come back to it later, it is still going to be there, although we really don't need it anymore. But at least it's not going to be right in our face, it's going to be way less distracting. So once you've mapped out your basic lights, we're just going to come back in and, like I mentioned, we're going to erase a very crisp line here between the two sections of the base. So just going back to your eraser, and I say crisp, but we're still going to use our soft brush no matter which version you're using. It's just that we're going to make it quite a bit smaller so that it is really precise. And then all you're going to do is you're going to use a downwards curve, erase that to make the end of your lights really crisp. Now these might be a little bit intense, don't worry, we're going to play with the opacity, but before we play with the opacity, we're going to add the very intense highlights just so we have a better idea of what we're working with. So just go ahead and create a new layer above everything you have so far. Rename that new layer to Lamp Highlights. And so that it stays within the shape of the lamp, once more, go ahead and apply that as a clipping mask. And here we're going to go back to the color we used for the highlights onto the glass. So it should still be in your history. If it is not, it was your secondary glow color. So in my case, that bright yellow that we made super, super bright and quite desaturated. So moving it towards the top left of our color selector. Here, same thing, we want a low opacity brush. Pretty small so that we have a lot of control over those highlights. And we're going to zoom on to the top first. And we're going to add a very thin highlight on the very edge of the top so that it pops from the background. So super, super thin. We're going to do the same thing onto the top. Maybe focusing on the corners just to be a little bit more precise. And we're also going to add a bit of that highlight on the bottom of the left side. So very, very thin again. It's barely noticeable, but if I was to hide it, you can see now the top just blends in the background, and now it doesn't. Now we're going to do the same thing on the bottom. So a very thin highlight on the very edge of the right side, covering the entire right side. Can spill a little bit on the base if you want, or the very bottom edge, I should say. And also it could spill a tiny little bit on the middle section, just a tiny bit of a highlight there as well. The left side, we're going to keep it even more subtle. We're going to focus that edge highlight on the middle of the base. So a little bit here. And a little bit here. And once you have those edge highlights, just go back with a slightly bigger version of your brush, so small to medium, still lower opacity, and add extra highlights over some of your base lights that we have. And we're going to focus those highlights exclusively on the right side of the piece. So I'm going to draw one here on the top. Maybe going over my strokes a few times towards the bottom so it's even more vibrant there. And then doing the same thing on the bottom, one very thin, crisp line. But maybe a second one right next to it that is a little bit shorter. This is pretty good, but we're going to go back and play with the opacity and the blending modes of these two layers just to make sure the light look really the best they can. So we're going to start by applying the lamp highlights as a blending mode. Once more here, feel free to just scroll through the list and see if there's something that you like. I think I'm going to go with hard light. And the lamp light layer itself, you could apply it as a blending mode if you want. I think I'm just going to lower the opacity of mine a little bit so it blends more with the base color. So I'm probably going to set it around Let's go with 50%. So here, feel free to pause the video if you want to take a little bit more time to work on your lamp itself. Otherwise, if you do want to animate your lamp, we're going to meet up in the next chapter in which we're going to plan the movement. If you do not want to animate your lamp, not a problem, just skip one chapter ahead to the lava section. And in that chapter, we're going to color the lava, finishing the illustration. As I mentioned in the intro, the animation we're going to do here is pretty simple. It is not technical in any way, but it does take a little bit of time because we're going to have to draw a bunch of different layers to have the final looping animation. And even if you're new to animation, you can totally do this. I'm going to show you exactly how to do it step by step. It's really just going to be sticking with it until we have all the different layers that we need. That being said, the first thing we need to do is just tell Procreate what layers are going to be our background and what layers are going to be a foreground, so that Procreate doesn't animate those, and then we'll be free to start creating the animation. So just like we did for all the glow effects we have, we grouped them and created a background group. We're going to group all of the other layers we have that are not the background into a foreground group. So from the base shape to the lamp highlight, just selecting everything, then tapping on group, collapsing the group, and renaming that group to foreground. Now we're going to open up the animation menu by going in the wrench icon menu here at the top and activating the animation assist toggle right there. Now if that makes your illustration look all weird, that is totally normal, bear with me. We just need to tell Procreate what is the background and what is the foreground. So if you scroll through this little bottom list right here, you should see the background color as well as two other frames that those are called. One that is your background group and one that is your foreground group. So go ahead and tap on the foreground, and from there you should be able to activate this foreground toggle right here, which means Procreate is not going to animate this layer anymore. And I'm noticing here I do have a bit of a weird edge in my glow. I think that's my secondary wall glow, so I'm just going to go back on that layer right here, wall glow, and I'm going to add a bit of blur to get rid of that edge. So if you have the same thing, feel free to go ahead and do that. There we go, that's much better. And then we're going to tell Procreate what is the background. So same thing here, you would just tap on the frame that is your background in your menu right here at the bottom. But if, like me, you do not have the background toggle option, it is because you have something between the background color layer and your background group. So in my case here, I just had my original example. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And I lied to you earlier, I said you were going to have your background color as a frame. That is not true. For me, it was just my example that was showing up. That was a bit weird. But anyway, at this stage now, if I go back on my background frame, I should have the background toggle right here. So now that we told Procreate what was the background and the foreground, if we click play, nothing should move. Great. Which means we can start creating layers that are going to become the actual frames of the animation. Now, without getting into really intense animation theory, which I would not be the right person to teach you that anyway, because I'm an illustrator, not an animator, but the way to think about animation in Procreate is to think of all the layers that we create as little pages of a flip book. So if you've ever seen a flip book, it's just a bunch of pages of paper, pieces of paper put together as a little book. And if you flip through it, it's going to look like there is movement happening because the page all have a very similar drawing or base drawing with just a tiny difference between them. And when you compound all those differences, it creates a movement. So we're going to do exactly the same thing, but instead of pages of paper, we're going to use layers, because that's what Procreate uses. And so we're just simply going to create the first layer between the background and the foreground, of course. And we're going to rename that layer to lava. Not lava, lava, there we go. Now here, obviously, you're going to go back to the lava color that we picked at the very start. So that was your first glow color. We're finally going to use it for the lava. So in my case, this bright pink right here. Again, that was a color that was quite high in terms of brightness, not fully bright, but almost there. And yeah, I would say 2/3 of the way up in terms of the saturation. And we're going to go back to a hard round brush, so whatever one you've been using to draw the base shapes. So either the hard brush from the airbrushing pack if you're working with free Procreate brushes, or if you have my inking, stippling, and texture bundle, the ultra smooth tracing. And here, just so that we don't pull the hair out of our head, we're going to go with a much simpler version of a lava lamp, which means it's just going to be one bubble going up and down. I know in theory, lava lamps, there's a bunch of bubbles and then they kind of flop into each other and create this cool lava-like movement. But animating this within Procreate would take a lot of layers, and a lot of time. So once you're done with this video, honestly, if you want to add extra bubbles, feel free to go ahead, but I already know this tutorial is going to be way too long and I already feel bad about it, so I'm going to keep it fairly simple. But again, this is another option that you would have to customize your own piece, adding more bubbles than just one. And we're going to start here with just one frame, obviously, of the animation, and it would be a bit of a middle, intermediate kind of frame, I would say, meaning we have some movement happening already. The bubble is starting to detach from the bottom. So we're going to draw this kind of curvy lava at the bottom that starts going up and then create some sort of bubble like this. Then we're going to connect that shape towards the bottom and fill it in to create the lava silhouette, which you can then refine to your liking. Now for this stage, it's going to be really helpful having a good eraser just so that we can make sure all the curves are exactly how we want them to be. So just set your eraser to whichever brush you're using to draw your shapes. So a hard brush. I'm actually going to cheat a little bit. Instead of setting it to the ultra smooth tracing, I'm just going to set it to the base round brush. But whatever hard round brush you have, without texture, without feathering, would work really well. Really anything that allows you to come back in and refine the shape a little bit. And we're also going to add a little bit of that lava at the top, just a little bit of a blob. Like this. And you might notice I'm not getting the lava to touch the very end of the lamp, although I kind of did there. Mistake on my end. There we go. Because the glass has a bit of thickness, so if you make the lava touch the edge, it's like the glass is non-existent, which is not true. So just leaving the tiniest little bit of gap. And you can use your highlight as your reference for the thickness of the gap, just so it's the same all the time. So this is our base lava shape, so think of it as the initial first page of the flipbook. Now we're going to create a bunch of layers that have slight variations on that shape until we have the whole animation. So again, as you can see, it's very simple, it is just a little bit time consuming. Now to make it a little bit easier on ourselves, what we're going to do is we're going to go in the settings here of our animation menu. And we're going to activate what is called Onion Skin Frame. And Onion Skin Frame is going to allow you to see the frames or the pages of your flipbook before and after the one you're working on, which is going to make it quite easy to just add that slight variation because we're going to see what was right beforehand. So here, Onion Skin Frame, honestly, you could set it to whatever you want between 1, 2, and 3. I think I'm going to set it to 2 for now. And you can also set the opacity to whatever you want. It is a personal preference, but making sure you have those at least activated is going to make it way, way, way easier. So from there, just go ahead, create a new layer above your lava layer. And here, honestly, if you want, you could rename it to lava, but I'm not gonna lie, I'm just gonna keep mine as a layer with a number because it actually is helpful to have the number if we mess up. So feel free to rename it if you want, but again, I'm just gonna keep mine as is. And just so you can see it well on my screen, I'm not exactly sure how much the camera is picking up from now. I'm going to increase my onion skin opacity to 50%. That should be good. But yeah, otherwise all we're going to do, like I mentioned, is we're just going to create this slight variation to have the second page of our flipbook. So if the bubble is going up, this section is going to narrow, and then the bubble itself is going to get a little bit bigger and it's going to be a little bit higher. So just like that. And then maybe a little bit more of the lava at the bottom kind of went in the bubble, meaning we might have a little bit lower of a lava level. And the great thing about lava lamps is that the lava liquid, I really don't know what it actually is, like what kind of liquid it is, but it seems like it's not really following the normal laws of physics. So that gives us a lot of leeway in our animation for it to not fully follow the laws of physics that, just water would follow. So essentially, it just means it doesn't need to be quite as perfect. And otherwise, same thing, we're just going to close the shape in the bottom. We don't see it, but it's still very important. And then fill it in to create the silhouette. And then we're just going to quickly draw over the blob that we have at the top. We're not going to create an exact copy because then it wouldn't move at all. but by just going over it pretty quickly with our hand, it's going to add a bit of a wiggle in the shape, which is going to make it look like that wiggling lava. So now if we tap play, we're going to start seeing a bit of a very, very simple animation. So we're just going to keep going through, adding more layers above the ones that we just created. So just tapping to create the new layer. And again, because we have onion skits frame, it's pretty easy to see what we're doing, seeing what was there before. So I think at this stage, I'm going to have my bubble be fully separated from the bottom. So I'm not going to have this little section anymore, but it might be a little bit pointier towards the bottom because it just separated. And it's going to be quite a bit thicker and a little bit above as well. Now that might be a little bit too advanced for this tutorial, but I'm still going to mention it because whenever I keep animation tutorials very simple for beginners, I always get pretty angry, nasty comments from animators because I didn't mention a certain law of animation or whatever, so I'm going to mention it, but if it feels too much for you, just pretend I didn't say anything. So one rule in animation is trying to keep volumes fairly consistent. So this bubble, although it is changing size, should remain roughly the same volume. And there's no clear rule on how to do that. It is really something you need to get a feel for, and that comes with practice and over time. But just keep that in mind when we make this bubble move further up, just try and make it look like it has the same amount of liquid within it. That's all. Now that rule also applies to the lava at the bottom and the top, but not quite as much because there is this bottom section and top section that contains lava, so you can think the lava moves within there as well, which affects how much is at the top and the bottom. So that gives us, again, a little bit more freedom to not fully adhere to the laws of physics, I guess. Now, one thing to note here is that when the bubble separates, there's kind of this little elastic movement in this bottom fluid, the bottom lava. So it is not going to be fully straight just yet. For now, we're going to have this kind of hill mountain shape where the drop separated. And because of that kind of elastic effect, we're going to have a little bit of a ripple, so the sides are going to get a little bit thicker. Now that might be a little bit too intense, too big of a change. So I'm just going to smooth it in a little bit. And then for the top again, we're just going to quickly go over to have the slightest variation, but not too much. So I'm going to keep my video going here, obviously, so you can follow along and do what I'm doing. But for the next few stages, essentially all we're doing is we're bringing this bubble upwards until it meets the top. And as it goes upwards, it's going to squish a little bit horizontally. And we're going to keep that ripple effect going in the very bottom. So again, feel free to just copy what I'm doing if you want. Otherwise, you can also simplify it. What you would do for that is just bring a round bubble that doesn't change upwards until the top, and then soften these lines until it gets smooth. So if you're not exactly sure what to do here, feel free to stop drawing for a second, go through the video a little bit just to see what I'm doing, and then pause the video and draw it in your piece. And it is always really helpful whenever you draw a new frame to play the animation just to make sure it makes sense, because if you go too far and draw too many frames and then realize there's one that just doesn't work at all, it's quite hard to go back and fix all the frames from that point on. And with that, it is time for the secret password. So if you've watched this fun video, please go ahead and leave me a comment with which color you're using for your lava lamp. Now, if you're new on the channel, you might be a little bit confused with what is the secret password thing. Essentially, it's a game that we play here in all of my videos, or at least all my long-form step-by-step illustration videos. I hide a secret password for you to find, and that does a few things. The most important one being that, believe it or not, it does give me a lot of insight into how to edit and pace my videos better, and that helps me create better tutorials for you. So again, if you watched this far, just leave me a comment telling me which color you're using for your lava lamp, and then we're going to keep going. Now, one little note about the base lava, once you get it to this U shape, it's going to start flattening a little bit, so it's really going to start resting as opposed to having this slingshot ripple effect. Now, once the lava at the bottom is flat, you're just going to treat it as the top, so just going over the line to add the slightest movement without making it move too much. And once your bubble reaches the top, we're essentially going to do the inverse of what we did at the bottom with the bubbles separating, which means this bubble, when it gets in contact with the top of lava, is going to squish. So it's going to be wider but shorter. And the lava at the top itself is also going to flatten, and to flatten, it's going to have to send some of the goop on the sides. And so from there, we're just going to essentially move the bubble until it is fully included in the top. So the top is going to be quite a bit thicker. So the next frame could just be even thicker edges and a mountain where the bubble used to be. And then we're going to create the ripple effect, meaning we're going to have that bubble absorbed, going through a flat section and then a U shape, and then back into the bubble section so that we can send it down. Maybe doing a few frames of fairly flat at the top and bottom before it goes down again. And then making it go down, maybe on the opposite side, just so the loop is a bit more interesting. So thinning the edges and creating a bit of a mountain. Well, that's not a mountain, it's inverted mountain, but that. That's pretty good. And then creating the same drop effect that we had when we started the animation with the bubble going up, but this time down. So it's the same thing, but just flipped. So that means the sides are going to get thinner and we're going to get this little narrow section starting to get created with a bubble or a drop accumulating in the bottom. Accentuating the narrowing and the thinning. Don't forget the bottom. Now I'm looking at the animation here and I can tell I'm making my bubble that goes down way smaller than the one that went up, which makes no sense if we remember the volume rule of animation. So I'm just going to go back in and make the bubble a little bit thicker in the last two layers that I did, or the last two frames that I did. Let's see. I think that'll do. It is not exactly the same bubble anyway. When you have a lava lamp, the bubbles change sizes, but if it's just a really small one and a big one, it's kind of weird, especially if you just have one. So fairly consistent, doesn't have to be exact same, but that's a bit better, I think. I'm really struggling making them not crooked. Now, if you're doing this and you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is taking me so long, that cannot be right. I can tell you I have been filming for 1 hour and 54 minutes and 31 seconds right now, so it's not just you, it really does take a long time. But anyway, we're gonna keep going. Oops, almost forgot the bubble there. That would have been funny. I'm going to speed through this process because it's the exact same as when the bubble was going up, but it's going down. So I'm just going to breathe through this. And when the bubble gets to the bottom, same thing as when it got to the top, we're just going to flatten both the bubble as well as the base and kind of squishing the liquid towards the edges. That being said, I said that too early. I think I have 1 frame left before it actually touches the bottom. And then we're going to, again, absorb this middle mountain, make the edges thicker, and then resorb everything, so flattening everything. Although I might have a little bit of that mountain still. just like that. Maybe keeping it flat for a few frames. And then to make sure that we can actually have a nice loop, we're going to go back to the original layer that we have. So the first one we drew at the bottom, it should be named lava, and we're going to duplicate that layer. And we're going to bring the copy at the very top of the layers we have, just so that we can see it as the onion skin frames. And then the goal is going to be creating a few more layers or a few more frames between the one that we just did, which has the flat bottom, and the one that is the start of animation. So creating a new layer there and bringing the lava from the flat situation it is in towards more of a mountain and then a bubble. So just a bit of a mountain for now. And again, the same flat top. Then another layer still below the original lava. We're really just using that one for reference, with even more of a mountain. It's not curvy enough right there. Making that maybe a little bit more curvy. Oh yeah. I think one more layer should be good in my case. So really deep curves there with just a bit of a start of the bubble. And of course the flat top. And then from there we can just go ahead and delete this lava copy layer from the top. We don't need it twice, otherwise it's going to stutter in the animation. So just swiping it towards the left and then clicking delete. And from there, if you click play, it should go in a nice loop. Yay! I always find it so satisfying when it actually loops well. Now, one thing I forgot to mention though is you need to set your play settings to loop. So just picking settings and picking loop here, because if you pick ping pong or one shot, it's just not going to go in the right order for your layers. And if you want to speed up your animations, that is not really the technical explanation of frame per second, but it is what it does in this case. You could just play with that slider here and it's going to make the animation either faster or slower. Now, lava lamps usually are very slow, so I'm going to keep mine at 4 per second. So feel free to pause the video here. If you notice that some of your frames are not exactly how you want them to be, you always have the option to just scroll through the list, find the frame, and then tweak it a little bit. Otherwise, the hardest part of the work is done. We're going to meet in the next chapter, which is going to be adding a few lights on the lava to make it pop and really bring the piece to the next level. Okay, so at this stage, if you did the animation, you should have all of your layers with your lamp or your lava painted on them. I can't speak anymore. But if you skipped over the animation and just want a flat illustration that doesn't move, at this stage, just pause the video, take a few minutes, create a new layer that you're going to rename to lava, if I can find it. And with the same brush you've been using to draw all the basic shapes, as well as your main lava color, so the original one, the first one we use for the glow, you're just going to draw whatever lava shape you want. Now here I kept it pretty simple for the animation, but you could really experiment having a bunch more bubbles if you're keeping yours as a still illustration. If I go back to my example, hopefully I still have it. No, I deleted it. Well, I'll put it somewhere on the screen now, but as you can see, I had a bunch of bubbles, and if the illustration is flat, I recommend doing that because it does make it a little bit more interesting. So once we have either our multiple lava layers or our single lava layers, we're going to go back and add some lights coming from the base, like the base of the lamp here, and then on the lava. So go ahead and open your background group and create a new layer above everything you have in that group that you're going to rename to lamp light. There we go. And here you're going to go back to, I would say, the original secondary color you had, or something in the same range. Honestly, it doesn't need to be exact, just the same kind of color. So in my case, I still have it in my story here. It was this bright yellow. And you're going to bring it probably towards the middle here of the top edge of your color selector. So we don't want it to be quite as bright as the highlights, but we don't want it to be quite as dark as the original color we had. So kind of like that. And you're going to go back to whichever soft brush you've been using. So either, I said I wouldn't mention it again, but I will, in the airbrushing pack that comes with Procreate, the soft brush, or if you have my bundle in the texture and grit pack, the big soft layer builder. You're going to lift up the opacity of the brush back up to 100%. You might make your brush a little bit bigger. Again, no precise size here. And you're just going to use that to brush some light on the bottom of the lamp. Now you could keep it as a straight line, or you could add a bit of a U shape to make it a bit more fancy. I'm going to go with a very slight U shape like this. And then once more, we're just going to open the blending modes and scroll through the list until we find something that we like. I think add looks really good, so that's a contender for me for sure. Yeah, I think add, but I might lower the opacity a little bit. Around, I'm not sure. 74%. And then we're just going to go through either the one lava layer we have or all of the lava layers we have. It's going to be quite a bit faster than creating them, trust me. And we're going to add that light onto the lava itself. And to make it extra easy on ourselves, we're going to activate what is called auto lock on the lava layer, which means in this video, we're going to have tried and use all the types of masks available in Procreate. So layer mask, clipping mask, and auto lock, which doesn't have mask in the name, but it's still kind of a mask. And so to activate auto lock, all you have to do is take 2 fingers and swipe whichever layer you want to apply it to towards the right with those 2 fingers. And that's going to create the little checkered pattern right here. If for some reason it's not working for you, you can just tap on the layer and select auto lock from the menu. And now with auto lock activated, whatever we draw on this layer is going to stay within the shape that was already there, which means we can just quickly come in and brush our lights. Now, as you've seen, masks are really helpful and they're very powerful. If you want to learn more about them and see, for example, what's different between them and when you should use a certain type of mask versus another, I will add a mask cheat sheet in the video description, so you can just go ahead, click on that. It is part of my Procreate Jumpstart Kit, which means it is totally free to download. So again, it will be linked in the description below, so don't forget to go ahead and download that. Otherwise, the lights we're going to add are going to be very simple. Whenever there's an element that is facing the bottom of the lamp, which is where the light is coming from, we're going to add a light there. Now the lights are going to be more intense at the bottom, obviously, because that's where the original light source is, and they're going to get progressively lighter or less intense, let's say, as we go upwards. So we're going to have a bit of a light on this top section, but it's really not going to be super intense, so press very lightly on your pencil and then just color the bottom. You're always going to add some pretty intense light at the bottom, in the middle of the bottom, I would say, of the bottom lava. I know I said bottom like 3 times in the last 2 seconds, but really this area right here. And if you do have a bubble, you're going to have a bit of light on the bottom of the bubble as well. And even though the bubble is not fully separated here, it is still a bubble, so we're still going to add a bit of light on the bottom. And if you want to make it pop even more, what you can do is add an extra step, which is going back to the brighter version you have of that secondary color. So either making it brighter from the selector, or you might still have it in your history. And then kind of like we did on the edges of the top here and the bottom, just gently add a very thin highlight on the edges of your shapes whenever they're facing downwards. Now, if you have an animation, we're just going to repeat that on all the different layers we have. It should be pretty quick. So we're just going to do the same steps. So activating alpha lock, maybe on all the layers at once, it might be a little bit faster. And then you can go through all the layers you have and adding the initial light. And then once you've done it on all the layers, you can just go back in with this intense highlight that we just did on the edges to really make everything pop. And I'm going to stop talking here to let you focus on drawing your own lights. I'm going to keep my video going in the background if you want to use it as a reference, but there's really nothing new here. It's just that we have to go through all of the different layers. Honestly, I'm going to go back and lower the lamp light opacity quite a lot. I feel like otherwise my bubbles get lost, and we work so hard on the bubbles. I don't want them to get lost, so I think I'm going to keep it like that. I think that was around 25%. The glow is not as intense, but we can see the animation much better. Now, if we want to get really fancy here, when we add the highlights, in theory, the bubble would be casting or preventing the light from getting to this top section, which means you can add the highlights, focusing them on the sides of this top lava blob. And if you're still watching here, you might be noticing I'm starting to add highlights on the bottom section as well. It is not facing the light source in the sense that the light source is there. It's not surface tension, because that's not what it is for light, but the thickness of the surface, I have zero idea of how to explain that with the rules of physics, but usually it's a very thin line at the surface of a transparent liquid or solid. If there's light underneath, it's going to be very bright. So all that to say, you can add a bit of a highlight at the top of the bottom lava section as well. If you enjoyed this video and want more Procreate animation tutorials, I highly recommend you check out this playlist because I have a bunch more for you, and I promise they're quite a bit shorter than this one. But before you leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos I post every Tuesday and Saturday. Then click on the link right here, and I'll meet you there.